Hello, everyone. Hello, hello.
Good morning.
Good evening.
Good morning, all.
Right. If you want to come off
Hi,
mute,
good
you
evening.
can. Feel free just for now. We'll get you to put mute back on in a few minutes. But you want to say hello?
Hello from Norway. Hello from Norway.
Hey,
Greetings.
Norway. Yeah. Why don't we do that if you feel like it? Who was that?
Tom. That's Tom Gill.
Tom Gill.
Morning, Tom.
Morning, Tom.
Good morning to you both. Oh.
I'm from Linda. Good evening from Germany.
Hey.
Germany.
Hi, Linda.
Hello.
Good
from
evening
Edinburgh.
from Italy.
Italy.
Hey, Italy.
Hi, Italy.
Morning, Linda.
By the way, it's snowing. It's snowing in Milan, north
It's
of Italy.
not.
But not in Norway, in Oslo yet.
And it's snowing in
from
Scotland,
Warsaw,
but only on the inside.
Good evening from the Netherlands.
Netherlands.
Hey, Netherlands.
Hey,
This is pretty cool.
he started very early with his beautiful looking wine.
It's whiskey.
Yes. Oh, whiskey.
Good night
Better.
from Israel.
Right. Yeah, we've got a lot of people come on here so far. We've got 60 so far. We've got more coming in. This is good. I'm just sort of carefully letting you in, making sure there are no body parts on display. Well, obviously heads, that's all right. Other unmentionables, which I won't mention. Robert, could you turn your screen sharing off just for now?
Yep.
Right. We're nearly getting there. We've got more.
Morning, JT.
Okay, yep. Right.
Lovely. Right. If everyone's there, just as we're joining in, pop into, what's it called? Grid view. If you like, and hang on, I keep losing things here. Here we got one more coming. Right, pop into grid view. If you want to turn on your webcam, feel free. If you don't, we will make assumptions about you, but we won't go any further than that. It's just really lovely to see you all here. Yeah, good looking. What a good looking. Oh, sorry. No, maybe not so good looking. I'm just looking at that corner. Jack Vincent, it's lovely to see you there. Smiling back. Hello. Tom, hello. Kay, hello. Andrew. We've got a few Andrews here. So we're just going to let people come in because, and we'll start in about probably 3 or 4 minutes. Just keep in mind that we are as competent as you are, or less, with Zoom, okay? And we're making this up as we go. So if you have any advice about stuff that we're doing that's stupid, would you pop a little thing in there, and we'll ignore it. We'll try and read it. But everyone say hello and stuff, and then we'll just start in a minute. If you can't see Robert on the screen, he should, I think, he's on the left of my screen, top left. He's the one in green. Next to that, that's me talking in the middle there. And then there's Graham Scott, who's waving just now. So Graham and I are your hosts. I'm the host, right? I'm the hostess with the mostest here. Graham's the one that's going to ask the difficult questions of Robert. Robert's the one that's going to ignore what Graham asks because he's a consultant and give a different answer entirely that sounds even better. So Robert is in Australia. Anyone else here from Australia? I think yeah, a few there.
Yeah, I've seen a few familiar names.
JT.
Yep, that's lovely. So Robert, I'm going to ask you in a minute about the snake you saw riding a bicycle yesterday, but don't answer just yet. I'm at the top of the South Island of New Zealand in a lovely place called Nelson, and it's coming into summer, and I went for my first swim over the weekend. It was very cold. But I'm recovering now. Graham lives in a place called Cambridge, which is about 2/3 of the way up the North Island in New Zealand. And we normally have Carl here, who lives in Tauranga, who is, hang on, just got to do a minute all there. And the three of us, just because we call ourselves the bottleneck guys, because it's, you know, this is kind of theory constraint stuff. And we're nearly about to start, and I'll stop rabbiting on a minute. But while we're waiting just for the last few to come in, Robert Bolton is in an obscure part of Australia. How many hours drive from Sydney, Robert?
I'm generally in Sydney, but at the moment I'm at a place called Iniliquin, which is in the Riverina. It's 10 hours southwest of Sydney or 4 hours due north of Melbourne. It's very flat, and at the moment it's been very hot. So on Saturday it was 45 degrees, and generally each morning I go for a quick bike ride before I start doing anything else during the day.
Right, now,
and
tell us about the, you told me before that you saw a snake riding a bicycle.
Well, I saw lots of snakes. We have lots of snakes out here, and they're on the roads and they're slithering away and all the rest of it. But they do like to come close to bike riders. So I do regularly see snakes, and there's also, this is an area noted for its spiders. So our snakes are not too poisonous down here. In Australia's got a lot of poisonous snakes. They tend to be up the northern parts of Australia, like in the Northern Territory and Queensland. But we do have a lot of snakes down here, and there's a lot of good wheat and various other areas. So lots of sheep, cattle, rice, orchards are not too far. We're a lot of hazelnuts nearby and orchards. So very flat, very hot.
Right,
a big irrigation area.
What's that behind you? Because you're in your garage.
That's a car. That's a Mercedes, and this is what you have to use in Australia. We don't make our own cars anymore, so we have to import the great cars from other great parts of the world. And Mercedes are a very, very good car. And so actually staying with friends down in the Riverina at the moment, which is very nice.
Alrighty, okay, that's excellent. So we're all, just remember, if you're just joining us, we're all figuring out how to do this with not, I was going to say Skype, but Zoom. This is like the zombie apocalypse here, and so can you all stay on mute, and we'll try and unmute it, because probably the worst thing for things like this is if you accidentally come off mute, and we hear. And it just gets really distracting. So try and stay off mute, and we'll mute people. But if you want to ask something, Graham and I will be looking at the chat and things. Or if you really desperately need to ask something, either wave and then just interrupt. You can feel free to keep your webcam on or off, whatever suits you. So we've got the guest, Robert Bolton, the host, and the interrogator. No, the interviewer here, Graham. And now, can I ask you now, or advise you, probably the best bet is to flip out, go up to the top of your screen if you're on a thing, and click the view button and go to speaker mode. And then if we go question stuff, it's a good idea then to flip back into this grid view. And I'm going to do the same. And I reckon, if you're all good, how about we formally start? Right. Okay. Can I start with the first question then, since I'm talking? Graham, what would you like to know from Robert?
I'm fascinated I know Robert's background. He's done a lot of work in the mining industry, but also in the banking industry. And those just seem like two completely different industries to be working in. So I'm going to be fascinated to see what his processes are and what he's doing that can be flipped between those two industries.
Okay, great.
Good. Would it be worth telling us a bit about your background then, Robert?
All right. I'm looking straight ahead because I've got two screens and I'm going to have another one starting in a minute. Background, if you haven't already gathered, I'm from the country, New South Wales, come off a farm. Dad had a lot of dairy farms out in this part of the country. Did construction engineering and worked between New South Wales and Canberra on a lot of civil building and a couple of mines, so particularly gold mines. Worked in about 6 gold mines altogether. My theory of constraints exposure started in 1990 during the MBA in the UK at a school called Ashridge. At Ashridge, there was a chap named Alex Knight, which looking at the audience, a number of you people would be familiar with. And he taught us about the goal and some early simulators. When I came back to Australia, I started off as a management consultant, mainly with Price Waterhouse. And we got involved in a number of business fixes of business turnarounds. One of the projects I got involved was very early on, around about 1994, 95, was Argyle Diamonds, where we applied activity-based costing and theory constraints to basically change the life of the mine. Now, just the key thing on mines, when you read through reams and reams of information, they talk about mines and all the areas. The big metric or the big measure that a mining executive uses is the life of mine. And that means how long a mine lasts. So it can last 10 years, it can last 20, and some big ones have lasted hundreds and hundreds of years. So what happened with Argyle, when we were there, our project was, before we got there, they were thinking that mine would only last 3 years, but we actually did a lot of things and it actually lasted another 30 years. So the management, the shareholders, and all the people were all happy because it lasted, a lot longer.
This is what we talked about, Robert, when we did our podcast.
Correct. We talked about that on the podcast. That's just right. And it was simplifying the mining area. And back to your question, Graham, and I say this quite often, is that the commonality between mining and banking is time-poor people dealing with a lot of information who are making quick decisions. And that's it. That's the very common similarity. So understanding the language, understanding the pressure of what your clients and what the management and what the executive and particularly the supervisors are going through is a key attribute. So after Argyle, I then went independent. I found out about a book called It's Not Luck. And It's Not Luck is where I first came across the term prerequisite tree. And today's talk is all about using the prerequisite tree to drive a new product development, and how we basically radically cut the duration of a new product, which is what we'll talk about. But at the time of It's Not Luck, I found out about what AGI was. And because of my background in construction, I was asked, did I want to participate in the development of critical chain? And from about 1997 to about 2002, did a lot of trips to the UK and particularly New Haven, Connecticut, which, looking at a few people, they would know, the legendary Orange Street and the Colonial Inn all around Yale College or Yale University, and got involved very much from critical chain. Since then, I've been basically working with mining companies, financial institutions or banks, and more IT startups and then the last major people, which I still am with, is more than an IT startup. It's actually an IT case study and a very successful business, company called WiseTech Global. And I've seen a couple of people here today from WiseTech. So that's a little bit about my background.
That'd be really cool. It'd be really neat, I think, if we followed up some of the mining stuff and you could draw some pictures for us next year.
Sure. Right up.
And if we could maybe get some people from WiseTech to come and share their stuff next year would be really, really cool, because it's a great story. So, investment banking. Let's focus in on that. Now, this is a really bold claim. 80%. Give me the numbers. 80% / reduction. That sounds like a Harvey Norman sale, which will only make sense if you're over here. But one of those sales is too good to be true. Tell us more. 80%.
Yes. All right. Investment bank. So within a institution or a banking group, there's a lots of different parts, and banking's, when they say it's a bank on the outside, there's actually a stack of internal businesses. Investment banking is typically where they will take people's money, from us, and they'll call us investors, and they will do something with it. They'll invest in shares, equities, bonds, and do a whole heap of other things. So that's the area. It's the investors, and there's a lot of group of people which we'll talk about it a bit in my chat called the traders. but there's also lawyers, compliance, marketing, sales. It's a whole heap of people. But investment banking is essentially banks take your money, invest it, and then hopefully grow your money and pass that on to you. And it's called funds management or pension funds. And there's a number of different terms across the industry and across the globe. Yep.
Cool. Right. So that's investment banking. You carefully avoided the 80%.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I missed that question. Yes, the industry norm, and I was talking about 6 months ago to someone else that's still involved in the industry, to get a new product. So what I say is a product in investment banking, that's a disclosure statement or a brochure that you will sign, and it's the rules of what the investment banking can or can't do with their money. So it's like a rule book, sometimes called a prospectus, sometimes called a product disclosure statement, and all that. So that's typically a product, and we'll talk about the prerequisite, how to bring all together the items that need to be done to do that. Typically, that takes 18 months to 2 years to get developed. We did it in 13 or 14 weeks. And that was the big bonus. And that was what was key to the business. Just to put it in context, this is going back to 2006, pre-GFC. At the time, Merrill Lynch was the first one that launched a particular product, which was called a separately managed account. They've now renamed the account for marketing purposes in Australia, based on what they were doing in the US.
Yep.
And the bank I was working with, which was Bankers Trust, which was part of Westpac Group. Bankers Trust wanted to be second into the market. And because they had a bigger marketing arm and a very good sales force, they needed to get it by the 1st of October to meet the sales cycle. So they've got a whole sales cycle of different products. So
there's a sense
of urgency, and they said, can we do it in under 3 to 4 months?
Right.
And this is what the story's about.
Okay, cool. So actually that's lovely framing. So normally it would take this long. Suddenly there's a whole lot of money to be made by getting in.
Yes.
It's like that, get your product to market before Christmas if you're selling kids' toys, not in February. So you've got to focus and say, right, what do you need to do to get there? So suddenly you've got a really an ambitious target and you're aiming to get there. Right.
And just for the Northern Hemisphere people, I'm going to talk different dates because in Australia, our end of financial year is 30th of June, and the big peak in volume of activity is typically April, May, June, with a minor peak just coming into Christmas. Whereas in the Northern Hemisphere, so the USA, Canada, Europe, it'll be November, December to get your investments and everything aligned before 31 December. So it's the same process, it's just out by 6 months because of the end of financial years. And Graham would be very familiar with end of financial year work.
Yes.
So let's take that. First off, thank you to the people who've helped me turn off that annoying ding-dong noise. So we've got rid of that. Right. Now, Robert, so I'm just taking this picture here. So you've got a big investment bank, you've got a lot of money, and then you're looking at, can we deliver this quickly, right? So now, when I hear constraints, first thing my mind goes to is bottlenecks, and because I know a bit about that, I go drum buffetry, right? I then hear, no, this is a project, so I go critical chain. So if people aren't familiar with this, I think you use critical chain as your overarching idea. Would that be right?
Critical chain was used as the overarching idea. The concept of constraints was used. What was unique about this particular item is the constraint changed very quickly after 3 weeks. And in the story, I'll tell you where the constraint went, where we assumed it would be to where it was, and how we got the executives, but particularly a group of people called traders, aligned very quickly to get it done in time.
Very good.
And this highlighted a cultural element within the investment banking environment.
Yeah, excellent.
So if those people that have seen the Michael Lewis movie, The Big Short, there's lots of characters like that. Whether they're in New York, Sydney, London, Tokyo, Hong Kong, investment bankers are fairly consistent culture. They dress the same and they all talk the same, and it's all about money.
Cool.
For them.
Okay, good. So, sense of urgency. We've got a couple of tools there. We've got finding the bottleneck, constraints, management, basic stuff, but in a different environment. We've got critical chain, project management, delivery method. But then we're going to focus on what happened at the beginning. I think, is that right?
Yep.
Right.
Yep. So, a lot of focus on the beginning.
And there's a tool here, just to put a name around it. It's got a bunch of different names depending on how you use it. So if you have read It's Not Luck, it would be the prerequisite tree.
Yes.
If you're doing a project plan, which you are, you call it something different.
Yes, the term necessary condition network, which I first heard from James Powell about 10 years before I did this work, is just another name for creating a prerequisite tree, but it actually works well in some environments. And it actually worked well in the bank. They liked it, the necessary condition.
Right.
As opposed to an intermediate objective. They if you say a necessary condition, that's less threatening than a intermediate objective, because intermediate objective means targets. And yes, bankers, believe it or not, do not like targets because they've got so many of them.
Okay, cool. So we've got this tool here. So just to give it a frame, people might have heard we're going to use the prerequisite tree, but it's got a more palatable name for project land called the necessary condition network. And some people call this backward planning, I think.
Backwards planning. It's also used sometimes in project management. They will call it PERTs and PERT networks.
Excellent.
But cool. The name gets used interchangeably. My preference is to use the as described in It's Not Luck. Have the goal or the key purpose, ambitious target at the top and leading up to it. So it looks like a tree or a root structure going to a branch.
What would be a really good time now if you shared your screen? Because I know what's happening next.
All right, now I've got to make sure I get this right. So I've got a couple of questions. Now, how do I share the screen now? I hit the green button and does that work? Oh, I see, share. And I want to go to that one there. Here we go. All right, before I kick off, one of the things I find, and Graham and I have had a lot of conversations about, that is understanding the language of the business and where you're doing with. So we've got a little bit of a quiz here, which will go for a couple of minutes. And the language of investment banking in Australia, I'm quite specific on that because it does vary a bit. Here's 4 terms that are very commonly used in the banks. I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes and Graham will read out the answers. What is the meaning of the word capacity, FUM, and compliance? So this is a knowledge for the audience to say, before I go on, what do you understand those words to mean from a banker's and particularly investment banker's perspective? So think The Big Short. What do you think it means? Do you want me to just read out the answers as they come?
Yeah, I'm waiting on answers to come through at the moment in the chat. FUM, we've got funds under management.
Very good.
Daniel,
who was that? They get a tick.
Daniel and Andrew Kay as well. Capacity is customers we can process.
Interesting.
Philip.
That's from Philip Oakley.
Very good, Philip. Good attempt.
Over in Scotland.
A brick is $1 million.
Very good. Who got that?
That was Dirk.
Well done, Dirk. You've clearly spoken to the banking world.
Lovely.
Compliance, regulation, legal, from Rona, Seb, and Jack.
Yes, Rona, it's good. Yep.
And slightly cynical, compliance is looking legal.
That one's getting closer.
Capacity is
get away with. Rodrigo.
Capacity, the ability to pull in new funds under management.
That's not bad. That's not bad. That's getting good. Yep.
Compliance, what we can get away with.
Yep.
Staying out of jail.
You're so cynical.
Yep.
Oh.
Okay.
And a suggestion that brick may come from the French briquettes, which was 1 million old centimes.
That's probably right. The answer on the brick is absolutely spot on, because they talk bricks. And when they talk about salaries, is the person on a third of a brick or a half a brick or a quarter of a brick or a full brick? So you go into meetings, they'll say, oh yeah, he's a brick man. He's a brick. Very good. So everyone knows what a brick is. That's very impressive. And you're right, and the funds under management, right. The other two, we're still talking on, the double C's, capacity and compliance.
Right. So you got some answers. Why did you ask?
All right. Well, the reason was, in that audience, we've just now got a 50% hit rate on 4 terms, which are quite key when you're talking to the business. And when you, with inside an investment bank, they talk this language like everybody should know, and they should know. Compliance, generally, right, what you can get away with, whatever else. Typically, the people on the trading floor consider the compliance the enemy. That's what I was looking for there, because they don't want to do any compliance and they don't want to do any paperwork. They just want to make money and then, you know, in the case of Sydney, go surfing or go night clubbing. Doing things right is not necessarily there. Capacity, and this is an interesting one. And in the language of bank, and particularly investment banking area, capacity is the amount of shares you can trade that you don't have to disclose. So in Australia's case, it's typically 5% on a listed stock exchange. So if you've got shares in Rio Tinto, BHP, or one of the banks, if you have more than a 5% stake, you have to disclose to the market you've got more than 5%. And so from a trader's or an investment banker's perspective, who you don't want your competition to know who you're betting on, you don't want to exceed capacity. In other words, exceed 5%. So in every meeting, when we talked about what's going to happen next, the term capacity would come up on just about every occurrence. And the 2 other people who were the key leaders of the project team, as long as we had to be right on our toes on that term. And the point I'm raising is, in this environment, and the people dealing with understanding their language was absolutely key. So if I bring in other TOC people into a bank, I would say, right, we will need to understand capacity is not what we think it is. And the other questions about, is it the amount of money we can take and all that sort of stuff, you'd think that's what it is, but it's not. What they talk about is how much do we own of a particular asset, and when do we disclose it? And they generally avoid disclosing it. And so other people don't know what they're doing. So their competitors don't know what they're doing. It's a highly competitive industry. If you've seen The Big Short, that's pretty not far off the mark.
It's interesting, because we would say capacity, so that's that big immediate gap, isn't it?
Correct.
Cool. Okay.
And that's what I say when you're dealing with these people, information is the key, and understanding their language is the key. So when I go into mining, one of the reasons when I'm working for mining client, very quickly after about an hour, the mining guys the word I'm going to use is sound me out to say, well, do you understand mining? Do you understand our business? And I will throw a few things there, and I'll throw a few things back, and I'll say, yep, this guy gets our business. He will ask the questions and he will clarify the terminology. So particularly in the first 4 to 5 weeks of any new client engagement, understanding the language of the business is absolutely key. Cool. And what we just saw there in this little exercise is 50% of the people of this audience, so what have we got, 50, 60 people, were right on FUM and bricks, and compliance, they were definitely going the right direction, but the word capacity was totally different meaning to what we're used to as a TOC community.
That's really cool. That's very interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
So you'd almost say, Robert, that knowing the key language of your industry would be a prerequisite to working in there?
Very early on, you sell yourself that you're here to do a job. I'm here to process. I need to clarify the terms. And when you're doing, in this case, the product was a new legal document, clarifying terms went all the way through because it was going into a legal document. It doesn't change. And in the case of this particular product, it hasn't changed in 15 years. Yes, knowing it's not necessarily a prerequisite, but having an understanding to actually then go to the next level of detail is very important. So I knew about capacity and I knew about all those before I went in there. And that was one of the reasons why they would accept me. And the point is accepting, because when I talk about what happened is what the different groups did within the project, which is what the key finding was.
Cool.
And
can you show me a prerequisite tree, Robert? I'm getting anxious. I want to see a prerequisite tree.
Yep. Okay. So most of you people would be familiar with a prerequisite tree of this type or necessary condition network. And you'll see there the target was the SMA offer to advice by 1st of October 2006. An SMA offer is a new product, separately management account, and advice was sales, was banking talk for the sales group. Okay, right? And then all those boxes were all the different prerequisites trees, and it started off with a series of post-its on a wall, and we basically said these are all the items that need to be done. And I used the word mini milestones, prerequisite tree, necessary condition, but basically conditions that had to be met. I didn't get into task structure or what was doing at the time. Now, just to fill you in on the context, so I described earlier, Bankers Trust wanted to be the second in this particular product in Australia. Their initial funds under management target was 500 million. A year after the project, they doubled it. So they basically got $1 billion in funds under management, and you can work out their revenue or their profit that they get from that. This became very much an A3 piece of paper where each week I would color it in, going from complete or ongoing purple to complete, to say as it was done. So this was what it looked like at the 30th of September, about a week before the project was finished. And that would be a diagram that I would have for the key executives.
Okay.
Now,
so can you roll this back?
First thing, what's that?
Could you roll this back and assume I know nothing? Right?
Okay.
So just talk through this stuff here, because I think we're just looking at the mix of people here. You've got some TSE experts, some people who might not be familiar. Can you? So I can see one bit there without knowing the absolute details of them, but I know the white one. That's the target you talked about.
Correct.
Yep.
So if we have a look at it, typically is a backwards logic structure. So if we look down the middle pathway, it says in order for the target of SMA offer to be advised by the 1st of October, we must have advice rollout plan is developed. And in order for the advice rollout plan to be developed, the tax requirements are determined. And in order to do that we must start with a business case is complete. So you'll see that works up the central spiral. And I've got 4 conditions, being M1, then M4, then M6, before we can get to that. But also for the SMA to work, and there's an incorrect arrow, M6 engagement with sales and desktop program needs to be done before we can take it to advice. So what this is a high-level high-level endpoint condition outcome type diagram.
Okay.
Now, why this was really key for the banks, they operate in tasks and they're busy people and they like to do things quickly. They don't necessarily see the big picture. I'd worked a lot in banks, and the 3 or 4 previous projects in other parts of the bank, they liked this because they could see what the big picture was and they got what the target was. So every meeting we'd start off, okay, as you know, and particularly when I was dealing with half-brick lawyers, just saying, okay, our target is this, and this is our, what the product roadmap will look like. And I use the word roadmap, call this the roadmap all the time and during that. So that's how you look at these diagrams. And it's just saying the ones leading, going from the bottom to the top is how it should be structured.
Okay. Right. So can we even dig in a little bit further than that? Because I think this will be the bit that people who are watching will have seen bottleneck stuff. They will have seen the idea of critical chain. But this here's what you use before you start executing the project to make sure that the project is as tight and as short and as well thought out as possible at the start. Would that be right?
Yes, this was done in the first week. It's done right at the start, and it's the key roadmap of what needs to happen. So what are the endpoints we need? What are the tasks we are doing? What conditions we need to meet? Yes. So, and that's why I like necessary condition network. It's the condition that we need to do the network in this particular order. So for instance, following the business case, the tax one was quite a big deal because Australian tax law, I think all tax law is complicated globally, but Australian tax law is particularly complicated. And so the tax requirements need to be determined upfront, and they had to actually get approval in principle from their tax office before that could go into a completed document, which is the white box.
Okay.
And so before we could tell the sales guys what they had to do, the tax requirements, so the M4 box that I'm pointing at here, which you can't see, was need to be done.
Okay.
And so that was the endpoint, the necessary condition, the state that had to exist before we even looked at advice rolling out. Now, if you just heard that statement, I actually, what it also did is split up between two different groups of people. The tax requirements were groups of specialized accountants and lawyers who were one team within a bank, and the advice rollout, which I know is sales, is another team. So we don't go to the sales guys until we've got the tax sorted out, because they're going to say, well, we can't do anything until you've got the tax sorted out. So, okay, we'll come to you sales guys after we've got the tax sorted out.
So take me back here. You're sitting here, and this is the output. And in fact, this is a version of this diagram that was live just shortly before you finished effectively. But right at the beginning, what's different that you're doing here as opposed to what normal people do? So why did that diagram there, which looks fairly simple and straightforward, why did that make a difference that compared to 4 months rather than 18 months, say?
The key difference on the diagram back then, and I think this is still a problem with project management today, this step is usually not done. They will start off going straight into Microsoft Project and do task, and you'll see task all the way through, and you'll get a nice little flow, and people call it waterfall. The whole agile community don't like waterfall because, if you look at a critical path thing, it looks like a waterfall. But and then they will typically have, when you go on to a PERT type diagram, which we'll see shortly, the milestones will be down the bottom. The conditions of why you're doing it's down the bottom. And I'm saying, well, visually, this is silly. We should have the milestones up the top, or in this case, necessary conditions. So we know why we are doing something to what we want to meet. Cool. So I know when I'm talking to a half-brick tax accountant, his job is to determine the requirements before we go and talk to sales guys. Because sales guys are not saying, well, that's a tax issue. We don't care.
So
and that's the difference. But the traditional way is we do the tasks first before we do the milestones. This is reversing the process.
We pop in, and so that's how you end up with 18-month-long projects. Is because you come in, you fill them all out, you get all of the details there. So now, this is something that...
And they're also doing things in the wrong order, Clark. They're doing things in the wrong order. I've said here, we've just gone down the central spiral. We need to get the tax done before we even talk to sales. Okay? We need, and marketing can go separate. The product disclosure statements are complete, but the tax requirements was a big issue up front. And this is coming out of the first one-day workshop. Okay.
Okay, we've got some questions come in. Here, this is good. So just trying to frame this. So this made a huge difference, this diagram. And you do it at the beginning, which is brilliant. And it sets up the whole thing to be much, much quicker, more focused, clean, done in the right order. So can I come to Andrew here, who's asked, Robert, how did you identify the elements of the diagram and how did you sequence them?
Was conducted of a meeting between the product owner, or basically an executive who was going to be looking after this product. So he was the head of private banking, and 3 of his people who used to take 2 years to do that. So we ran a meeting. We did on whiteboards and post-it notes and basically looking like this, except for different colors. And it was working backwards. So I would just have the post-it notes said, okay, once we got a business case done, what comes next and why? And then the answer was the why was always the key, because then you would take it through. And what I was saying, we don't need to worry about the task. We can put them in another diagram later.
So that's the detail.
The key milestones? That's the detail.
You need the milestones.
What is the key? Correct.
Sorry,
milestones or necessary conditions. I'm just plugging someone else. Bill Detman's done a lot on what he calls the goal trees. This is like a mini goal tree. And if I remember correctly, some of the ideas around goal trees were being developed in the TAC community around about the 2004 to 2006. I remember a particularly good conference in Miami where we did that.
So I think one of the key things for me here is by focusing on the outcome, the effect you want, rather than the tasks, you're actually much more likely to get what you want. I mean, I'm sure all of us listening in can think of times where we've given someone a task, they've done exactly what we asked them to do, and the result's been an absolute shambles. It's not what we wanted at all. So that's one of the keys that I'm taking away from this. And I think the other thing I was talking to Clark about before this started is this, I think of a prerequisite tree, it's like the question, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is 1 bite at a time. And what a prerequisite tree does is it breaks the elephant down into bite-sized chunks that you know how to do, and then it helps you figure out which end of the elephant to start eating. So it's breaking it down into chunks and then ordering it in the logical way so that you get the prerequisites. I need to do this before I need to do that.
That's right.
Is there another bit there that you're at the start of this and you need to mobilize all these people and get them moving in the right direction? And there's like if you think in terms of there's a tension that people want to get active and get doing things. And this is kind of just slowing it down a little bit and making sure that they're doing the right things. So I just noticed a comment here from Powell, and I hope I said your name correct there. So is this kind of like an agile MVP, just called a minimal required conditions? So let me just break that out. This is trying to figure out the minimum that you have to do and the order that you have to do it at a high level to achieve that white box in the middle, which is that really ambitious date. So is there a sense of minimalism here?
I'm not sure what an agile MPV is, but what you've described is what it was. This was the minimum that needed to be done. Just so you're aware, the chief executive of the investment bank who reported up to the board, CEO of Westpac, this was his guideline. He would take a color A3 sheet of this to say, this is the roadmap, this is where we're up to. I would have them colored and it dated what date it was, and it became a reporting. We used to meet with him for about an hour every week. It was Monday afternoon. And in the meeting was the 3 project team, himself plus his secretary. And the secretary, what his secretary did, used to say, right, we need doors open at this time to these people. And he would just give her, said, righto, can you set up 10-minute meetings with these people? And she would then come to us and say, righto, yes, Guy has spoken to these people, and off you go. And so that was very important introduction. And he liked the idea that when we went to him, he said, you don't have to talk to sales until we've got tax done. He said, no, that's right. He said, yeah, that's how it works. I said, well, yeah, let's go not annoy sales because they're going to, want to change something. Let's go to them after we know that the tax requirements are done and the marketing plan and that sort of stuff is segmented. So
can I try
and that falls back into the compliance issues. Yeah.
Can we try and untangle 2 bits in there? Because I think it's just this here is the style of thinking. The first bit is the urgency, and then this is the style of thinking of how to do something that's urgent and get it done quickly. So there's an interesting one of the things you said there is that, well, actually, it's a very, very short small diagram for a big, valuable project. But you said you kept the tasks separate. So
yes.
if I was looking at a Microsoft project, I would have a bunch of stuff here, a bunch of tasks under them, a bunch of details. How do you keep the tasks separate? Or what?
Like that.
Just like that.
Yeah. Okay.
So where are the tasks?
This is the goals of, that's the task map that was also supporting this. This would come first. So here's our roadmap. Here's our necessary conditions. Here's where we're going. We are, we're 3 weeks in and tax requirements are getting detailed and this is where we're up to. And then we talk through the technical bits like this. This is just done in Excel, is your typical waterfall condition. Okay. All right. So this is difficult to read and people get lost in the detail. It's really for reporting and knowing what work is to be done. Okay. This is why we were here and why we're having a meeting. So if I take, for instance, when you go to a bank and you're meeting with senior experts in their area, usually a lot of these meetings may take half an hour putting it into context.
Yes.
Here, we could put this piece of paper down and say, righto, this is our project, SMA offer to advice by the 1st of October. This is how we're fitting it in. We're here to talk about M5 and what's the tasks that need to be done. You put that down on a piece of paper and then off they go. And they say, oh, you're serious, you're organized. Oh, okay, you're not here to waste my time. And lawyers don't like their time being wasted, particularly in the bank, because it's a different payment from external lawyers. And take into account, the lawyers will usually have a target of when they've got to go and get advice, so particularly around the tax requirements. And this was a complicated financial markets product, okay? And it was cutting edge at the time. And it all had to do with who owned the security as it went through a process. But that's the detail we have to get into later. Here's what we were doing, because everybody knew the 1st of October was when it had to be ready for sales to do it for the following year. And that was the goal.
This is like the map, if you're going to do a long distance drive, you go into Google and you get the map that shows you where you're going to go. Someone else, or maybe it's evolving as you're doing it, is actually zooming in and getting out the step-by-step instructions. And they're kept separate. So you've got a big picture, which shows you very clearly where you've got to go. But then this one here is the more detail. Can I just, so I'm going to pretend I'm aghast at this. Hey, why don't people do that? I know people don't do that because I've seen huge detailed things printed out on the side of the walls and they manage with that. Why don't people do this instinctively? Or maybe people do.
The only group of people I see doing it instinctively are investment bankers, because they will start from, okay, how much we're going to get out of this and work backwards. They'll be working through a deal structure. And talking to these people, they particularly when I get into the traders versus the lawyers in a minute, they got this, and that's where it would do. Most people want to start. Here's the task. We start at the beginning and go to the end. This was turning it around 180 degrees. Now, I'd done quite a bit of work. I'd probably been at Westpac for 2 years in other parts of the bank, and my reputation from other areas got me into this particular group.
Mhm.
This is not common practice, and Microsoft Project and the other software areas really say you need to do a task. And the actual writing of the task, and other people in the audience will know, getting clarity and having very short boxes with precise statements. For those people who remember the categories of legitimate reservations, if you've been trained on it and can do it, this is where the value gets added very early on. And it was just the same sheet every meeting. Bang. Here's where we're up to. Here's what we're doing. We're still on target. Okay.
I've got one more question, then I'm going to hand over to Graham. I'll go. Actually, you, Graham. I'll hold off.
Oh no, I was just following up on the diagram you've got there, Robert. We've got M3 is being marked as complete, and yet M2 is still ongoing. So the question is coming from some of our viewers as to how can one be complete if the prerequisite hasn't been done?
Right. The definition behind M2 was the products were in boxes ready for the sales conference. As of the date, so the 30th of September, they were being printed, but they weren't complete. Now you can do the internal due diligence off a draft that you know is not going to be changing, which happened 2 weeks before. So a lot of people ask that question, and the executives would say, yes, that is a correct statement as at this point in time, because it's still in the printers. They're due the next 2 or 3 days. And that was a printing issue because, they were all at that time we're talking about M8, which was how the information was going to go through the trading floor. And I was dealing with the trading platform officers. But because we had that, M3 was key. Yes, this supplies the internal due diligence. This is a whole heap of risk statements, and those risk statements were reviewed by people you would know, the auditors, of what they come in when they audit all the trading and all the everything's happened. Just remember the product, the SMA offer is a set of rules of how the investment bank takes your money and invests it. And that's what the document is. That was the goal.
So
that's how that happened.
In this particular case, M2 was good enough that M3 could carry on and be finished.
Correct.
And I suppose if you were breaking this down, you could have had split M2 into 2 parts, one which was finishing the statement and one which was printing it. And that would have been another way of,
that's another way of doing it. But this everybody was happy with this, that it was complete or ongoing. And when I started, there was another color, which was a light yellow, basically saying, we don't know what we've got to do to achieve this condition. Okay. So we know we've got to do it. We don't know what it is. So that's a different context. So in other words, business case is complete. So that was what that is. And behind it, there was like 4 or 5 other prerequisites to say, to do a business case, this needs to happen. It needs to be in this document that goes to somebody in an executive point who approves the business case. Yes, you can spend this amount of money to go ahead and develop the product. And in this case, Guy had the authority to do it, but he still needed the documents to do it.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
But yes, behind all these, it would be a stack of other sub-prerequisites. But in this case, it was it hadn't printed by the 30th of September, but it was like a couple of days away.
Cool.
So everybody was confident that to do. Yep.
Can I just sneak us back here? Because we've got 4 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions if you want to hang around. But I'd like us to wrap this stuff up now, and then I'd love to get you back, Robert, next year to go into some of the other stuff that comes after this, because I think this is one of those secret things that's kind of hidden inside TOC, and it's kind of hard to do, but when you do it, it's really quite amazing how you can get that focus and achieve ambitious targets, but sum it up in a very simple diagram here. So I really like that, and I like it how it separates the detail from the big picture, so both can coexist and run at the same time. But I'd love to carry on, and actually, just for everyone who's watching it, it would be nice if we could just maybe finish just by summing up at a very high level the how you might find out what these steps are. But can I just point out one thing that you said earlier? You were tracking this week by week. I can imagine like one of those old paper flip books where they used to have animations. You know, you get them, they go, and you see an animation, and you could print off these each week with the different colors, and you can see a history of the thing just changing as you moved along those things, or something like that.
Yeah. This was the other document that would go to Guy and the executive team every week. And when I said we will keep the same roadmap, but we will change the work because we're dealing with things we don't know what we don't know. Mm-hmm. So if you have a look here on the first week, we had 80 tasks, and you'll see that pink, not defined, defined, and complete. Yep. Now, these are just the tasks broken up into what I call phases. So we know we've got to do something. We know we've got to produce a business case, but I don't know what it is yet. So that would be a pink. And then once we know what we've got to do, it becomes a yellow. And then when it's complete, it's complete. So this is a task flow diagram. This came actually from, I saw something similar at a TOC conference by David Anderson of Kanban fame. Mm-hmm. And he had this. Now, what I said right at week one, I said, the number of tasks is going to change, it'll probably double, and in this case, it nearly did. But the important thing is they all know what the roadmap is. That doesn't change, but this will, and this is how it changes. Yes. So, you know, as we find areas which we didn't know we had to do, say in weeks 4, the number of tasks go up, but you'll see the progress is measured. So the pinks are going down, the yellow is really your WIP number, and the grey is your complete. Mm-hmm. This showed the confidence that things were getting done. So, yeah, I still had that, which is where it all came from. Yep. This was the summary area. And up front, I said, and I'd done 3 similar projects within the bank. And I said, the number of tasks will double. These guys didn't care about budget because of how much money was involved. What they did care was about the time that we could get it done, in this case, week 14. And that was the key area. And this is the visual part. So this separates the task flow from the roadmap.
I love that.
And they were 2 separate pieces of paper describing 2 separate things.
And I think in Agile, we try and do the same. We keep that detail, but the big picture. I love that you've got the big picture there in the one pager that and I feel like in the Agile world, we kind of miss that stuff. But the elaboration of task detail as you go along, and not having to try and get everything right up front, all of the details.
Correct.
It's brilliant. You design the building, but you don't choose the color of the curtains until you get to the bit.
Correct.
You choose the color of the curtains.
Correct.
Beautiful.
Correct.
Can we wrap up there with one? I got one question, and I want one short answer, and it might come from you, Graham, or you, Robert. If I've got an ambitious target sitting at the top, what's the question I ask to come out with the obstacles that is the first step here?
You can go first, Graham.
It depends a little bit on the situation. I often use this tool when you throw up an ambitious task and immediately everyone's brain switches into that protective mode. Why can't it be done? So the question I ask from everyone is, what bothers you about this project? And then you start getting this whole list of, we don't have the money, we don't have the resources, we don't know where to go, we don't know what the tax requirements are, we haven't got marketing engaged, that sort of thing.
Brilliant.
I'm in the same page as Graham, and then this is what did in this case. What bothers you about doing it? We want to do this in 14 weeks. Why can't we do it? What are the issues that are coming out?
Yeah.
And using, if you follow that chapter from It's Not Luck, I mean, that's where I first did it from. The obstacles are this. What really bothers you? Why can't it be done? And then the quick thing is, and I've seen other people do this really well, going to the necessary condition. It can just be the total opposite of whatever the obstacle is, just to get a network. So they've got the idea of a roadmap. Fixing this is, we need to do this before this comes out of it. But the starting point's the same as Graham's, pretty much.
So it's flipping your thinking over. Instead of thinking about what we need to do, it's what's blocking us. And then if you can remove all the blockages, remove all the obstacles, then you get a smooth run.
Correct.
Sorry, Clark.
No, sorry, I apologise. I'm just conscious of the time. So I'd like to stop now and say, and then we can carry on with questions. Are you okay for questions, Robert?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. So carry on. If anyone wants,
the snakes will be off the road now because it's getting a bit warmer.
I was concerned about the snakes. Yeah. So we can have some questions and just have a nice Q&A, and we'll come back to GridView for that. But can I just say, for me, that has clarified that one diagram feels incredibly useful. But it's when it happens, which is at the beginning, and then how you use it and you track as you go along, and that thinking about what's stopping us achieving this, what's bothering us, tackling those rather than all of the minutiae. And then you do the minutiae of the detail, which is very important, much later. Really, really lovely. So thank you for that. We'll get you back to do more. But in the meantime, could we all go into GridView? Assuming you're all wearing clothing and stuff. Yeah, we still have got clothing. That's good. And just do run these little sort of this nice round of applause, or if you prefer a thumbs up or a thank you or something like that.
Thank you.
Perhaps if you could stop screen sharing, Robert, and then we'll be able to see a lot more of each other.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And we'll do that again.
I'll stop.
Should be yeah.
Yep.
Beautiful. Thank you. Right, just do one more time there. That'll be lovely.
Yeah.
Whoop, that's funny. I'm seeing Tom Gilb's screen now. How did that happen?
Did I do something?
I don't know. I've seen Tom Gilb's screen. Yeah.
I'll stop participant sharing. Hang on.
There we go.
I might have done it. Are we back to normal? Sorry, that was me.
Okay. So
When I undid the share.
Really good. Thank you, Robert. Just to sum that up, that might seem like a really simple little thing, right? But if you do that at the start of a big initiative, or even a small personal initiative that's feels like it's too big to handle, what's my ambitious target? What's stopping me? List out the obstacles, figure out how to overcome them. You will end up with like this minimum approach, and you'll have come up with so much easier plan. You will be surprised at how clever it makes you feel, because it just simplifies big gnarly things. So thank you for Robert. And now, if anyone wants a question for either Graham or Robert in particular, go for it.
And just while we're waiting, this prerequisite tree is one of my favourite tools. I've got someone coming to see me in about 25 minutes he's a young accountant in town. He's got a choice between buying into a larger practice when he's going to lose his autonomy, or trying to expand his own one-man practice. And at the moment, the thought of expanding his own one he's just coming up with this whole list of reasons why he can't. So we'll sit down with a pile of post-it notes, a big bit of paper, and I'm guessing within 3/4 of an hour, he'll have a plan. He'll know whether he can do it or not. I suspect once he sees it broken down, he'll be thinking, yes, I can do this. Then he'll just need to decide whether he wants to do it or not.
Cool. I like that. We've got a question here, Seraphim.
Robert, we've on constraints.
What was the constraint, Robert, for the traders?
Yes, we didn't really cover that. What happened on the project week 3? In the second week, we found that the tax accountants, the tax lawyers, and the tax experts didn't think this project could be achieved in the time frame because we didn't have agreement from the traders on what the percentages were. So there's a whole heap of percentages in one of these documents, who gets what, and it's called various different ratios, and they vary a bit country to country. So we went to Guy in week 3 and said, look, we thought we can do this in week 10, get that agreed with the traders. And the lawyers are saying, well, they're not going to do it until we get agreement with the traders. And I said, so we've changed the order slightly of not the roadmap, but when we get the traders to agree to these percentages. And he said, okay, well, we've got to do it. We can do it 5 weeks early. So that particular week, I was involved in 3 4-hour meetings over a week, typically after lunch, where there was a lot of discussions around funds under management percentages, intellectual property, and all the rest of it. But at the end of it, we got an agreement. And then the next week, we go and meet the lawyers and said, no, here's the percentages that's been agreed, and here's the signatures by the 8 people that needed to sign it off, and off they go. And they said, what? You achieved this? And then after that, then it got into the technical issues of who owns the security in which part of the process, which had to be clarified before the document could be done. And that was all over margin trading and all that sort of stuff that came out of it. But the lawyers didn't believe we could get the traders to agree on the percentage up front. They thought the traders would hold it back to the last minute. And evidently, this is pretty normal behavior across the industry, and it's going back to that way. So in other words, the constraint was getting agreements of key stakeholders along the way. And understanding what agreement was in what order. So that was one of the significant changes that happened, and that's a story in itself, dealing with the traders. But yeah, highly paid, very aggressive guys, very direct. They're mostly guys, sorry for the audience. It's about 90% guys, 10% girls. And don't get me wrong, there's some really smart female traders. I've seen them in operation. Yeah.
So, quick question here from Daniel. In this scenario, can something downstream ever force a change upstream? I.e., are there feedback loops? I think you might have just described one there. So
yeah, that was our original pathway. Was we didn't have to worry about getting the agreements on the MEO or the management expense ratio and those things until week 10. Another group of people said, no, we are not going to do our work because our experience has been this gets wasted and we have to do it again. You come back to us with the agreement for the traders. And 2 weeks later we did, and then they did it. So yes, that was not in the original detail network when we thought we needed to do something. That was the big one. And because we had the executive on side and we said, look, here's the obstacle that's going to prevent us. This is what we think we need to do. Are you with us or against us? He said, no, I'm with you. Yes, we need to do it. Bringing it forward 6 weeks or 8 weeks, whatever it was, no problem. There were a few others as well. The marketing area went a lot quicker because there was 2 young guys who were particularly good, and it was pretty much decoupled from the rest of the process. And the IT with the trading engine guys wouldn't do any work until the due diligence was done, so they didn't have to change any more work. They wanted to know what was the audit requirements, so they would have the software that can produce the information at the audit in progress. So there was a few, the actual sequencing of the tasks changed a lot, but the actual sequence of effects or the necessary conditions didn't. If that makes sense. There's a subtle difference between the two. And that's why I like using two separate papers, one for the necessary conditions or the effects diagram versus the tasks.
Good. Okay.
Keep them as two different concepts.
Right, Daniel, did you, I noticed you came off mute there. Did you, I think you did. Did you want to say anything there?
I just think I really enjoyed the presentation. Loved the high level focus, and as a former mathematician, good to see the set directed acyclic graphs put to good use. As an agile practitioner, and thinking about things like lean startup, there's the question of when you might use something like a story map that Pavel suggested, where the dependency structure is looser, but there's feedback. You want to demonstrate an early version to pilot customers and then iterate on it. Whereas this looks like a complex puzzle, which is largely dependency bound up front. So I'm just sort of going, when would I choose one tool or the other tool, and looking into the possibility of feedback loops. If the feedback loops are stronger, then I'm thinking, I'm curious about how it might apply. Whereas if that diagram can hold but through the whole time, I can see how brilliantly this would
try doing both. This one here can be done in an hour for most things. On paper.
That's right. I agree.
It's my answer to everything these days. Do both.
It's a good answer.
Right. Any other questions there? Thanks. Anyone want to willing to share their what do you call that thing? Voice. Anyone want to ask a question out loud? No? Okay. So, Powell, you look like you might have moved then suspiciously towards an unmute. So I'm going to ask you to unmute. Come on, say hello anyway. Tell me how to say your name correctly, because I've seen your name.
It's Pavel. Pavel, pleasure to meet you all. Yeah, Pavel is absolutely fine. I'm Polish. Nobody is perfect. That's fine. So my question, if I'm supposed to ask one, and I'm also coming from more like trying to put TOC inside agile software startup world. And I think I feel very odd here at this presentation. Just from curiosity, did you have a chance to estimate that project before, and you said we can do it so much faster, or you just basically being said to your stakeholders, hey, we're going to be faster than your usual time frame, trust us? Because I've got no idea how would you estimate based on this 1 hour workshop, because actually if you don't go into those crazy long lists of tasks, you would never be able to do that. And then also, I think I agree here with Daniel that your task, the one that you described, were really, really like human focused, which means, oh, we just have to get this guy to agree. And I know it takes a long time, but at the same time, when we are building software, it just takes X amount of hours. We just cannot do it 20 times faster just because we talk to a person. I want.
So, Robert.
Yeah, okay. Good questions. I've got to remember to look at the right screen going ahead. Couple of things.
Hello.
Yeah. Is he back? Can you hear me?
Oh, he's put himself on mute.
Yeah, okay. My answer to those, comparing a pure software project to this, is before I came to this project, I'd worked on 3 or 4 other projects where I delivered on time, and I was using the same set format to here's the prerequisite, here's the roadmap, and here's the task flow, and here's what's going on, and here's where I need your help to do that. So what I was doing was building the dependencies as we got more information on what the task dependencies needed to be. Now, in the case of the bank, don't get me wrong, they had cost estimates and we had budgets and all that sort of stuff, and I had to do cost reports as a side. But I basically said up front, look, here's the number of hours I think up there, but based on experience, we double everything and you put that in. And the executives would basically take that and give it to the finance people or the accountants, and they would leave us alone. That was literally how it worked. Because in those cases, the previous projects in other parts of the bank were all regulatory requirements where they had to get something done by a date to meet a regulatory requirement or they get fined. Now, I don't know if you've been watching the press in Australia in the last 2 years, but this bank that I worked for back then has hit big fines on other areas. So that is the environment that I was working in with these guys. Coming back, I think if you go on a pure software environment, and having worked on big software projects within the same bank, designing a test first or having a test framework and how much testing is required in the software, and then work out how you reduce the iterations is the key to all software development. At another time, Graham, there's a few other people here at WiseTech. I could talk for hours on that particular area. I'd recommend you have a look at the WiseTech website and what they're doing, because I think they've cracked a lot of these issues, what you're talking about. And in that, the clarity around prerequisites is one of the many elements that's in there. So they'll use the term necessary condition network because that's the language of the company in this case. Yeah, it can be done. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is that you've just given us an example where something was, 80% of the time was chopped out. It went 5 times faster than normal. It may not be possible to get that sort of saving in a software project, but you might get 10, 20%. I know, easy. Clark, you've been involved in much more software projects. When you found the bottleneck and got things going, what do you typically get?
Actually, it's so parallel. There's 2 bits with this. One is that there's so much most software projects that's not just building software. So you need an above software kind of network diagram here just to plan it. This is what we've got to do with all the other stuff. One of those bits might be sorting out the software on there. You might also take that, whatever the software is, and slice it up into smaller bits. But I've found, and this is Tom, I keep saying this, one of my heroes here. Hello, Tom. One of the things you get when you get into Tom's head via his wonderful books is that so many times less is not only absolutely achievable, it's better. So figure out what problem you're trying to solve, which is what Robert did. Get an ambitious date, and then get rid of all of the fluff that comes in. Just because fluff tends to be attracted to things with budgets. So figure out what you're chasing, get an ambitious target, and then sit down and go, what's stopping us doing this? And what you'll find is that 2 things happen in a big project. Most of the scope will disappear as actually not actually necessary. And some of it will come and say, look, actually, after we've done the big launch, we can do it later. Then suddenly you can deliver stuff early, start making money or saving hospital patients or whatever your domain is much, much sooner. And it's that same question, what's stopping us delivering something really valuable very quickly? And Tom's even probably 10 times more aggressive and clever about this than I am. Not that Tom's aggressive, but it's the same stuff. Oh, it's a bit scary there over in Norway. Tom, by the way, usually takes off the week before and after Christmas. I'm not sure why. He's got a second job. Yes.
Sorry, what was the question about Christmas?
What do you do at Christmas? I've heard that you're out delivering stuff over Christmas. That you'll be a lot shorter than it used to be.
Okay. No, like most Europeans, we celebrate Christmas on Christmas Eve rather than the Anglo-Christian day. That's maybe what you're thinking about.
No. There was the white beard thing. It seems to be slightly more trimmed than I remember.
Oh, the white beard thing.
Yeah,
that's because I am actually Santa Claus, but don't tell anybody. That's why I live in
the secret. Everyone that left early misses that. Can I ask Tom? I've already managed to procure some of next year's speakers by announcing them before I asked them. So can we get you to come along and do a chat sometime?
Yes.
Next year?
Oh, I love an audience. I'm a real ham, so the answer is yes.
Absolutely wonderful, brilliant.
And by the way, did you notice I put a little link into one of my latest lectures, so anybody who goes there will get a lot of stuff about top level agility, management agility.
Actually, that's probably a good way of it. I think like a lot of the stuff, the differentiation between top level and maybe lower level is something that a lot of people who work at the lower level don't really have an appreciation of. So just for everyone here, the first time I met Tom was in 2003 at XP Day. He got up and very politely told everyone they were wrong, more or less, and he was right. And I still think he is. But that might be a discussion for another day. I don't want to end up offending anyone, but yeah, okay, so Tom, consider yourself booked.
Okay, I'll come.
Any other questions coming through there? Yeah, Daniel's just given you another 10 points there, Tom. You're doing rather well. Yeah. Just checking there.
Well done.
Graham.
I see we got a question earlier from Jorge about, it says, at the moment, details, small tasks should be the responsibility of someone to command and control. How do you manage this issue? And I think be interested to hear what Robert's got to say. My thinking is if you're focusing on the effect you want, the outcome, then as long as your people are doing some task that will give you that outcome, you don't need to manage them you don't need to micromanage them. You're actually giving them a bit of space to use their own thinking, and quite often they'll come up with a better way than how you were going to do it. How did you manage this with your project, Robert?
Generally along those lines, we would put down the roadmap, the prerequisite tree or necessary condition network, talk about what needed to be done. I would say, okay, how many review points do you need? And typically the managers would be there with their couple of people who were going to do the work, and then we'd agree some cut-offs and some follow-up routines, and off they'd go. And the thing about these people, they were all smart. So don't get me wrong, you don't get in those positions because you're dumb. And they would try and do it as quick as they can. And once we agreed the review points with the right people, then it was pretty easy. So I keep harping on the tax issue, but the tax issue and the ownership of the equities was a big deal in the product. And where in the computer system that needed to occur, who could make a decision when it got to the trading floor was actually very important. So those are like technical issues where a lawyer would let a subordinate do it, but then there'd be review points back with other people. And actually what I'd be doing is getting everybody in a meeting room for an hour to say, this is how it's going to work. And that was there. So the actual handoff to the workers with a high level of trust, but with very strong review people, because they treat due diligence is a big deal in an investment bank, and so there was a lot of detailed review points or review meetings, call them what you want. They were typically called due diligence, so they had to be filed, and someone can look at it in 10 years' time if there's a problem.
How about unless anyone's got anything else, I sum up with Sarah, her comment here. Hi, Sarah. I'll just read that out. You don't have to read it out yourself. And then after I've read that out, I'm going to start counting down in my head down to 0. And then I'm going to hit that little red button there. And they have that awkward moment where it's got 2 options and you're all going to look at me go like this. And then I'm going to end the meeting. Unless anyone says that's a stupid idea, we'll just do that now. But first off, thank you, everyone. And let me finish with Sarah's comment. Sarah said, thanks for the Zoom. Great for the single page roadmap. Let someone else take care of the details. I think that's very succinctly put. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.